Warning, this video will contain spoilers up to chapter 1023. You've been warned. Hello my nakamatachi, this is JoyGirl and I want to discuss a question: was Whitebeard a good leader? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this was a question posed to me by one of our Joy Fleet members, MorningMorality. The question largely centered around Whitebeard's refusal to let Ace or even his other sons go to save Wano and avenge Odin. And I know this question about choosing not to save Odin has largely been resolved now, especially since chapter 999, but I'm gonna present some new ideas which I haven't seen being discussed before. And I think this may add a further layer to our understanding of Whitebeard's decision and as a result his character, to help us answer a deeper question of whether Whitebeard was a good leader. I wasn't caught up on One Piece when Odin's flashback was going on, but I do know that many fans asked why Whitebeard wasn't coming to save Wano, and this question persisted even after we reached Onigashima. For the most part, this question has now been put to bed as a result of chapter 999, because we saw through Marco's mini flashback that Ace had emphatically expressed his intention to go fight Kaido and save Wano, but Whitebeard stopped him, quite aggressively mind you. He put up much more opposition to Ace going to fight Kaido than we saw him do when a similar situation occurred years later with Ace wanting to go fight Blackbeard. And we know Ace's declaration to avenge Wano wasn't the first time this topic of saving Wano came up within the Whitebeard pirates, because Marco explicitly says that they had thought about moving on Wano many times, always deciding against it in the end. Even Izzo seemed to have largely made peace with this idea, although both Marco and Izzo implied that they would keenly join Ace should he get the green light from Whitebeard. So the reason suggested as to why Whitebeard wouldn't let Ace, or the rest of his sons for that matter, go to avenge Odin and save Wano was that it would result in a great loss of many lives. And while some fans pointed out that this was inconsistent with the situation at Marineford, where Whitebeard risked his sons' lives to save just Ace, I don't think this was inconsistent at all, because we saw Whitebeard try to convince Ace not to avenge Thatch earlier in the story, and though he wasn't as adamant as he was where it concerned Kaido, we could attribute this to a few factors. Firstly, in the case of Thatch's death, this was a situation where one of his sons committed the ultimate crime of killing another crewmate, which we could see to be an even greater shock and offense. Secondly, whilst Whitebeard was able to sense something was off with Blackbeard, this meant he wasn't able to gauge Blackbeard's exact level of strength. When it came to Kaido, however, Whitebeard knew firsthand just how strong Kaido was to be given the Yonko status in his own right, and to be considered the strongest creature in the world in parallel to his own epithet, the strongest man. So Whitebeard knew exactly the danger he'd be throwing his sons into and was not prepared to do it. So then why do it for Ace? Again, a couple of reasons. Unlike Odin and Thatch, Ace was still alive. Choosing not to risk the rest of his family's lives just for revenge is very different from choosing to save one of his sons. The second, not only was this a matter of saving Ace, but in a way saving all of his sons in the future. One of the first things we find out about Whitebeard in the series is that by just being a member of his crew demands fear from others. When Ace boards Buggy's ship, Buggy emphatically tells his crew not to harm Ace or else face Whitebeard's wrath. Similarly, we see Sengoku tell Ace that the Marines couldn't take any rash actions against Ace out of fear for the repercussions in facing Whitebeard. And all of this is actually somewhat ironic in the sense that when both Odin and Thatch were murdered, Whitebeard actually opposed his crew from taking action rather than unleashing his fury. But this actually makes perfect sense. This idea that no one of Whitebeard's crew is to be harmed or else incur his wrath is a reputation that seems to have been created by Whitebeard himself so as to instill fear in others and ensure his sons would be protected. And for the most part, clearly this was effective. Whitebeard's sheer name was so powerful that no one dared to lay a hand against Fishman Island or the many other islands that came under Whitebeard's protection. So if we go back to Whitebeard's decision to rescue Ace, if Whitebeard had not gone to save Ace at Marineford, this would have placed all of his sons in danger in the future. Ace's execution was a very public execution, being transmitted to all over the world. If the Marines broadcasted Ace's death and everyone witnessed Ace die without any action being taken by Whitebeard, this would ruin the fearsome reputation about Whitebeard and he would no longer be able to protect his sons. So when we apply all of this to Odin, it actually makes perfect sense to Whitebeard's character that he didn't avenge his former crewmate and brother. Odin was already dead and several years had passed already since then. Kaido is a known incredible force, which Whitebeard was sure would result in damage to his own crew. Wano is a very isolated country. Not only would that have made it a more dangerous journey for the Whitebeard pirates, the benefits gained for the crew would perhaps be weighed down down by the anticipated risk. Unlike at Marineford, where Whitebeard believed his presence was necessary for the continued protection of his sons, his intervention at Wano may not have served any such purpose for the crew other than revenge. So it makes perfect sense within Whitebeard's character that he prevented his sons from going to Wano to challenge Kaido, whilst he was willing to risk it all for Ace. None of these actions indicate any real inconsistencies within his character. But all of this only answers why Whitebeard didn't go to Wano to avenge Odin, and although it is certainly related, it doesn't quite answer the question of whether this makes Whitebeard a good leader. From everything discussed up to this point, we could certainly conclude that Whitebeard was a good father, doing his job to protect the rest of his family and to ensure no further harm would come to any of his members, but being a good father isn't quite the same as being a good leader. On one hand, yes, Whitebeard prioritized the safety of his crew, an important trait in a leader. But in reverse, does this indicate a lack of trust in his crew? Because when Whitebeard refused to let Ace go to Wano, he reminded Ace of his own lack of strength, and that if Odin, who is stronger than Ace, was unsuccessful in defeating Kaido, then Ace would have no chance. And it's hard to argue with that because Ace alone would have certainly faced a harsh defeat against Kaido. But the thing is, it's hard to picture Luffy saying that and refusing one of the Straw Hats in the same way. Luffy has shown time and time again that he will brave the impossible for his crewmates, no matter who he has to face up against. And granted, Luffy's never been in the exact same position where he'd only be taking revenge for someone who had already passed, but the situation at Wano wasn't solely about getting revenge. For Izzo, it was about his hometown, his sister Kiku and his friends were all there, and Ace would have been able to tell them exactly how dire the situation was for Wano and her citizens. And if we think about it like that, I cannot imagine a scenario where one of the Straw Hats expresses concern for a matter that's important to them, and Luffy refuses them simply because of the risks and unknown dangers it would pose. Which perhaps says more about Luffy's own recklessness, but this is what we love about Luffy as a leader. No matter the odds, Luffy believes in himself and his crew. He's promised himself that he'll be strong enough to protect all his nakama, but also has faith in his crew that they too will pull through when needed. And this is also a very important trait in a leader. Faith is a two-way street. Whilst the captain must be prepared to protect all his crew, he must also trust in his crew to be strong. In fact, it's one of the greatest critiques laid against Odin, that Odin didn't trust his scabbards enough and shouldered all the burdens on his own, quite literally. Odin's fierce independence was a trait we saw from the beginning of his flashback right up to his very last moments. Even raising the question for some, would things have gone differently if Odin had chosen to rely on his scabbards more? And this is strengthened by the fact that Kaido taunted Odin for his decision to play the fool for 5 years, ensuring no further bloodshed as a result of war, saying that had Odin chosen to fight back then, it would have been a difficult battle for Kaido and the Beast Pirates, who would have been the ones at a disadvantage. And this is a question I've personally had for a very long time, ever since reading this interchange between Odin and Kaido. Had Odin chosen to fight rather than accept Orochi's offer, could all of this have been prevented? And my interest was further piqued in chapter 1006 when Hyogoro's inner monologue revealed that he himself questioned throughout the years whether this was all avoidable had he joined Odin to fight Kaido back then. And considering that when Odin fought Kaido, he actually gained the upper hand at one point and was close to defeating him, I think there really was a chance that had all the samurai and Yakuza members fought Kaido and Orochi when Odin first returned to Wano, they would have had a great chance at winning. So did Odin, by choosing not to fight, fail as a leader, not only as a leader of the Scabbards, but also as the leader of Wano, by failing to trust that the combined strength of his citizens would be enough? Or did Odin know it was all futile? And this is a point I haven't seen being raised, because we know Odin and the Roger Pirates found something out about the world when they reached Laugh Tale, something about its past, but also something about its future, 20 years into the future to be exact. So did Odin already know that he would fail because the only ones who would be able to accomplish taking Kaido down would be the ones that will bring about the new dawn? Did he choose not to fight because he knew he wouldn't win, and so hopefully believed that sacrificing his pride was the best option to avoid any further bloodshed? And was his eventual fight against Kaido then purely based off his emotions? Sort of like when you already know the answer, but you need to test it out for yourself anyways. Kinda like when I go to the fridge multiple times to keep checking whether there's new food or snacks in there for me to eat, even though I know that there isn't. Did Odin know that he would lose because it wasn't time yet, but when faced with what happened to Hyogoro and the truth that Kaido and Orochi were never leaving, he just figured, to hell with it all, I might as well try. And well, honestly, it's difficult to say, but I'm inclined to say that's not the case. When Odin returned to Wano, I do think that he did believe it was his duty to open up Wano's borders to prepare the way for whoever would be coming in 20 years' time. And in his letter to Toki, he says that if he fails to defeat Kaido, there'll be no others who can stop Kaido for a long time. And the figures who arrive to participate in the Great War of the future would be the ones to defeat Kaido. And for me, this suggests that he wasn't anticipating from the beginning that he would lose, but rather that he just reached the conclusion that if even he failed, then there was no other chance for anyone else to succeed until the prophesied time. But what about in Whitebeard's case? Did Whitebeard know that intervening at Wano would be a futile cause? Because we know Roger met Whitebeard before his death for a final time, and during this meeting, Roger shared many of the secrets he found at Laugh-Tale, to the point that it seemed like Whitebeard too was aware that there will come a figure in the future who will herald in the new world. So after finding out that Odin had failed to defeat Kaido, did Whitebeard reach the same conclusion that Odin did, that the only other figures who could achieve this would be those prophesied individuals? When we say that Whitebeard refused to send his sons to Wano to avoid any unnecessary bloodshed, did Whitebeard really know that it would be, in all sense of the word, futile? And whilst one could argue that Whitebeard then still erred by withholding this from the crew, maybe that's not the case, because we know Whitebeard certainly did share some information about the world to his crew, such as about the existence of the Lunarian race above the Red Line, and he certainly didn't try to hide the fact that there was a figure whom Roger was waiting for, and that it was time for the new generation, because that seems to be exactly the role that Marco has been playing since he arrived at Onigashima, simply helping Luffy and the Straw Hats usher in the new era, fulfilling one of Whitebeard's final orders to protect Luffy at all costs, but also ensuring that Whitebeard's final words will be fulfilled, where the world will be able to witness the new generation. And I'm not suggesting that Whitebeard told his sons explicitly that he wasn't allowing them to go to Wano because he knew that they would lose back then, but then in 20 years time that they would be needed. But I think even without telling them this word for word, his sons, to the exception of Ace, understood. If we revisit Marco's flashback, whilst Ace is certainly riled up, Marco and Izzo aren't. And if anyone had the most investment to go to Wano, it would have been Izzo. But he seemed to have accepted Whitebeard's position, because perhaps Marco and Izzo knew that Whitebeard knew better than they did, that if he didn't allow it, it would be for good reason. Izzo even told Ace to invite him along if Whitebeard ever gave his permission, with Marco agreeing, because they understood that Whitebeard giving his permission would be the signal that it was now time. So if we go back to the question of whether Whitebeard failed to trust his sons, which made him fail as a leader, I think Whitebeard trusted his sons would understand, even without needing to tell them explicitly everything he knew. Similar to fathers or parents in real life, parents don't always necessarily share everything with their children, and at times for good reason. Whitebeard didn't need to explain everything because he trusted that they would understand. And well, based on what we've seen from Marco and Izzo during the war so far, it seems that they really did. But let me know what you think by leaving a comment below. Don't forget to like and share the video, and please do subscribe for more One Piece discussions. You can also join our JoyFleet Discord server for more One Piece related fun, and feel free to become a Patron member if you want an additional layer of fun in that server. Thank you to our patrons who help support the channel. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.